So good afternoon and welcome. This is the first in a series of talks which will celebrate our 100 years of liturgical life. So for the first few minutes, allow me to give you a commercial announcement. The Heritage Talks are beginning today, even though we actually opened our year of centenary celebration with the liturgical feast of Easter Sunday this past Easter. But on the 20th of each month from now through April 2025, which interestingly in 2025, April 20th will be Easter Sunday. So we are bookending the liturgical feast. On every 20th of the month, we will have a speaker who will address a specific element in the life of the shrine. Today I will be speaking about Bishop Shayan, the founder of the National Shrine and this space. In May, Father Dr. Bevel Bramwell, a Oblate of Mary Immaculate, an esteemed theologian and professor and author, will speak on Mary and the shrine. In June, Dr. Peter Latona, our in-house treasure and maestro, our director of music, will speak about music in the liturgy and will have musical examples. In July, Dr. William Portier, Eucharist and Dorothy Day. Dorothy Day speaks about how the shrine was her starting point, how she came here, walked up from the demonstration that was going on downtown in 1932 on December 8th, came up here, sat here in this space, and poured out her heart, asking God to give her direction. When she went back to New York, the Catholic worker movement began. In September, it will be Father Brian Kolodejczyk, the former General Superior of the Men's Missionaries of Charity. Father Brian was the director or the postulator for the cause of Mother Teresa. He is the director of the Mother Teresa Institute. October 20th will be a Sunday, so at the noon Mass, Monsignor Rossi, the rector of the National Shrine, will be the speaker. In November, Father Ishmael Ayala, who was the celebrant today, will be speaking on Viaticum, the food for the journey. December, we will not have a talk, but we will have the Rorate Mass, the traditional, very ancient practice of coming and having Mass before Lauds and bringing your candles, bringing your lantern, and everybody celebrating by candlelight, which at that time, that's all they had. In January, Judith Kelly will speak about Blessed Jerzy Popoluszko, the martyr of solidarity, who I just learned through Judith, had been here at the shrine in 1975 and 76 and celebrated Mass in one of our side chapels. February will be Monsignor Vito Buonanno, our director of pilgrimages, and he will speak about Eucharist and the pilgrimage, the great intercessory prayer. In March, Father Gary Banks, the concelebrant this afternoon, he will speak on every Catholic and apostle and the community of Thomas Judge. Thomas Judge was present here for the foundation stone ceremony, and their community was very much aligned with the beginning practices. And then we close the year on Easter Sunday with Cardinal Gregory in the Great Upper Church. So that is and it follows weekdays after the 5:10 Mass, Saturdays after the 12:10 Mass, and then December will be the Rorate Mass. So if I say to you today, this is the day the Lord has made, you say to me, let us reach and be glad. And I say, Alleluia, and you say, yes, and that is exactly what filled this space 100 years ago. That's how life in this space began. We said, this is the day the Lord has made, and it encompassed so very much. It wasn't just a liturgical celebration. It was the people of God gathering in one space, acting in the grace of God. And we have done that every day since that time. Don't you love it? Look at the two photos. Notice where the tower is here in the southeast corner. That's the nomadic tower. It goes from this point to that point. Eventually it comes over and rests in the southwest corner, basically because of the Lord's Chapel. They hadn't decided where they were going to place the Lord's Chapel. Once they decided, then that's where they went. So we have 100 years of worship in this space. This is the gentleman who started it all, Thomas Shayan. He was born in 1857 in New Hampshire. He was ordained a priest of Hartford. He was a church historian. In 1913, he has his first audience with Pius X and speaks about the National Shrine and his vision. 1914, he becomes a bishop, and then everything else just evolves. He dies in 1932, and he is the only person buried here in the Basilica. This is a very young, a very handsome Irishman. Yes, he is attractive, isn't he? Notice the lion-clawed chair in which he is seated. When Shayan came to D.C. in the early fall of 1891, and this is a direct quote from him, he says, he looked out upon the lonely and desolate surroundings of that day. This was not a particularly attractive part of the city. And there came to him a vision of a splendid basilica to the Blessed Virgin. This is the first time I'm saying this publicly. I have kept this little tidbit for myself, waiting for a moment to share it, and I'm sharing it today, that he had a vision of this church. And that is, he said, the beginning of the shrine. The northeast frontier is where we are located. The early maps of D.C. referred to this area as the frontier. It was desolate, it was lonely, it was unpopulated. It wasn't particularly attractive to all of the excitement of downtown. It was cleaner. It smelled nicer up here. You didn't have as many mosquitoes, so much so that presidents, particularly Abraham Lincoln and his wife, would summer up here at the Lincoln Cottage across the way. This whole area was a Catholic enclave that began in the 18th century with the Queen family. You know, if you are familiar with the area, you know how Michigan Avenue crosses, and once it crosses the district line, it becomes Queens Chapel Road. And that's because of the Queen family that owned all of this land around here. And then they started parceling it out. You got to remember, at the time in Maryland, there was a lot of anti-Catholicism, so you were not allowed to have Mass openly. You had to have it in your own private little chapel, which they did. Their chapel was burned several times to the ground and rebuilt several times. But it is the Queen family. Queens Chapel Road, which was originally called Bunker Hill Road, and then Michigan Avenue. During the Civil War, this is what the area looked like. And if you are familiar, again, at 10th and Michigan Avenue, probably where the Turkey Thicket Rec Center is, these are the people who camped there. The soldiers lived there with their families. There's a colorized version of the same photo. This is what's going on in the land. This is what's going on around here. This is a topographical map. This down here at the bottom is where we are, where it says Brooks Mansion. That's the approximate place where the Brookland Metro is. That red line is Michigan Avenue. Nicholas Queen, that's up there around Taylor, right around Taylor and 10th Street. Over there is in the corner what used to be the Queen's Chapel. Fort Bunker Hill is still up there. It's not far from the Franciscan monastery. So you have a good idea of the whole space. This in here, where the shrine is and a little bit above it, it says J. Middleton. That becomes all part of the university. Anne Margaret Queen Brooks marries Jehiel Brooks, and she is the oldest daughter of Nicholas Queen. They have their children, there they are up there, and they have one daughter, Laura, who becomes a sister of Loretto, and she's at the Visitation Academy in Georgetown. Jehiel Brooks actually is not Catholic. He has the deathbed conversion. So these are the people who own all the property, and we buy it. Northeast Washington, as Shayan says in 1909, was an undeveloped section of the city until Brookland was rightly accounted among the most desirable parts of our beautiful city. And it did become extremely desirable. Because, as I said earlier, this is what it looked like. Notice the railroad depot, which is also where we have the metro stop now. The Middleton home, there's Caldwell Hall. See the train going up and down. When we started getting water and plumbing and electricity, it was no longer a frontier, but it was considered civilized. Part of the problem here was during the winter, there used to be, at the entrance to the shrine there at Michigan and 4th, fountains, wells, and that's how the water was here. So during the winter, when the water froze, you didn't have any water, and there was no electricity. So it was a question of location. They knew they wanted to build a shrine. They knew they wanted to build a large church, but they weren't quite sure where they wanted to do it. In 1911, Patrick Waters was the secretary to Bishop Shahan, and I think he kind of shot himself in his foot. They were having a tour of the space, and Shayan was showing Father Waters what he wanted to build and how he wanted to build this church. And Father Waters says, "Oh, you really don't want to do that we don't have a need for that kind of church, and why don't you just build a small little chapel and just call it a day, But that wasn't to be. They talked about whether or not Fort Totten would be the appropriate space, and Shayan nixed that because he wanted it close to where he was going to be. And at that time, he was the rector of the university. The university was founded as a national seminary, a school of theology and philosophy, and it was devoted to educating priests and religious. So what we eventually learn comes to be called Little Rome actually is in many ways, because it is because of Shayan and his insight that all of the religious communities start buying up property around here and building their scholasticates. At its highest point, there are between 90 and 100 different religious communities populating this area. That is a lot. In 1914, what is called the Murphy location, they were trying to find a location suitable for this structure. And they were originally going to build in the French Gothic style. So this was the first shrine. And it was a group in New York, and this is what they were going to do. So you'll see what the interior was supposed to look like. You'll see what the promotional thing is. They put little cars and little people like that to give you ratio, give you dimension. So you can see it's a totally different structure. And what's interesting about this is this would have been the crypt. Look around you now and look at what this is. It's kind of popular. It's almost like a forest of pillars and columns. And it was supposed to go right here. This is where Mullen Library is now. And so if you know the space, when you're walking down that hill, there is a hill. And so if they were going to put in a church, they would have been able to put in a crypt church. And so that was the idea of a crypt space was born. And that was the first time they talked about that. And this Murphy location, the crypt idea, became such a thing in Shayan's mind that he didn't want to let go of it. So whatever they were going to decide on, he wanted this. And this is what he wrote in 1910. He always admired a free, open space, unbroken by columns, ideal for preaching, for singing, for seeing and hearing. And you're in the middle of it. I mean, how much better does it get than this? This space was designed to do exactly all of that, and it does it beyond compare. We are at our best when we're singing in here, actually, I think. He says, a glorious church sheds a warm, emotional, sacramental light. And that is what happens in this space. And that is how he chose to manifest the life of this shrine that he had in his mind, a noble Romanesque structure with all the peculiarities of the Romanesque style, which included a grand, freestanding double altar. That has always been there. It wasn't against the wall and then pulled out. It was always there. What does a double altar mean? It means both sides of the altar were consecrated so that they could celebrate on either side, and they did. The pews that you are seated in today that you enjoy were never here until 1960. This was done in true Basilica fashion. We brought in chairs, and if they didn't use chairs, particularly like for ordinations, ordination classes were very large, and they would occupy all of this space. So this is what we are looking at. This is the freestanding style in the Romanesque style. This is from 2 Italian missals of the 14th century, so you can see what Shayan was raised with, or where he studied and what he grew up with, where his heart kept going. He kept going back to this Romanesque style. So the question of location again. In 1919, Olmsted from New York, Boston, said Harewood, this location that we now occupy, was at the focal part of like a wheel, and that all of the scholasticates that I told you about and the university, everything would focus right here, and that this was the center point. And so he said this was the best place to build the shrine. So here's his blueprint, his drawing. And over here, see over there right by the word Olmsted, that was what I was telling you was the first proposed location for the shrine. 16th of May, 1920. This is the land where you are seated right now. Look at all the people. This building is right about where the shrine cafeteria is located now. That over there is the lodge that's right across the street from us, the Harewood Lodge. And these are everybody was gathering. Look at that space. Look at how expansive that is. This is looking south. And this is the blessing of the land. The little cabin over there is supposedly right about here, so that the first Mass is celebrated right about here. This is a bigger view of it. Notice the outline of the church. Yeah. This in the back, that's Trinity University. That's their dome. So you see how everything is happening? This really was an event. I can't begin to tell you what a big event this was here in D.C. And people were coming. They were getting special offers from New York jewelers and different companies to get special train fare to be able to come in for the event. This is 1920 September, the foundation stone ceremony. Now, I've heard people say that the foundation stone was moved. Well, that isn't true. The foundation stone was placed on this date, September 23rd, 1920, and it has stayed in that spot the entire time. Somebody said, oh, they moved that a long time ago. I said, I don't think so. So here is what it looked like that day. Where are we in relationship to that? We are standing. The foundation stone is in the oratory of Our Lady of Antipolo. It faces north. What you are seeing here is the south portion. So this is right where we are. And you'll notice everything was dug out. Remember I told you this crypt idea stuck with Shayan, so they actually dug out a crypt area. Portions of the shrine you will see where we are at ground level, and then all of a sudden there's this dip, and that's what happens here. Here's the north side with the inscription. So where everybody is behind that, that's where we are right now. That's where they stood to sing the Veni Creator Spiritus for the blessing of the stone. You gotta love this. A night of the Holy Sepulchre, one of the nights of the Holy Sepulchre. And the gentlemen in the frock coats and the top hats are the Knights of Columbus. Look who's here. Catherine Drexel. Catherine Drexel was at the ceremony. Her brother-in-law was actually on our board, our very first construction board. So there she is. This is the stone after it was in place. Notice how it's sitting on a brick table, and that was what was there. They filled that in, and it stayed there. It has never been moved. It was encased in wood to protect it, but it has always been there. This is the day when they had finally reached a construction point where they could take the stone out of its casing. It was quite the monument, quite the moment. And there it is today. So when we're finished here, I would encourage you to go back there and look at it. This is what the stone looks like. And this is from the other angle. And this is what's directly in front of you. Look at that. That's 1923. This is today. That very large crucifix, I still have it, and we're working on it. That was placed in October of 1923, and that crucifix manages to move as construction moves. And you're going to see how that works. Here it is. This is today, 100 years ago. This is Easter Sunday, 100 years ago. Look at the beams. I mean, when I say it's a construction site, it's a construction site. There was no mosaic floor. There were no pews. People had to be careful that they didn't get splinters or get cut by the wood. It was like this morning. It was cold and damp and rainy. It wasn't the most attractive of moments, but it was. It was, in spite of it all. This is, as you can see from one of the sides, this is looking from this side. So they're looking from here to here. Notice the chairs. Notice the crucifix. And this is looking this way, that way. So you can see the cross. You can see how they added their own little ornaments, their little pictures that they would decorate. And this is, if you're looking this way, if you look back that way, you'll see the doorways. So on Easter, that was all open. They didn't board that up. Can you imagine being in this space with that all open on Easter Sunday with the wind and the rain? You gotta love it. This was the organ, and its location was right about here, not there, but it was a little, if you look down at the bottom, you'll see it's a little pedal organ that you pump, and it has its own little bellows. There's no electricity, for this, so it's just a pump organ. No pedals, so it's a keyboard. It's really more or less a harmonium. And this is a little bit more ornate, a little bit closer up. This is the John Carroll altar, which was built by John Carroll in 1774, and it's nothing more than a box. That ornate piece on top was carved in 1852 by somebody in Philadelphia, I have no idea who, and they sent it to us. Now, I'm a little bit of the show and tell thing. This was a temporary altar. If you see that altar card in the front, if you look at the altar, you should see a little bump underneath the linen, and that was for this. This is what we call an altar stone, but they also called a portable altar. And it has the crosses, as you would find on an altar, in this center part. When it was required to have the relics of a martyr, they were placed in here. And since we were not finished, and you consecrate an altar when the church is finished, that wasn't going to happen for almost 40 more years. Every side altar, every altar in the shrine that was used, and this was the only space with altars, this was the only space where they celebrated Mass, every one of them had one of these. They all, and we have a collection of altar stones from that moment. So they were placed under the linens, and now in 1959, right before the dedication of the entire shrine, with the ceremony upstairs, all of these altars and the Lord's Chapel were all consecrated in 1 week. And if you know the old rite and the old ceremony, that was a tremendous amount of work, you know. So those were all consecrated, and their relics were placed in them, and then we no longer needed to use the portable stone. And afterwards, if you'd like to come and touch, you're free to do that. She gets to do it now. When you look at this photo and you see those flowers, I have to tell you, they didn't go to florists to get that. Those come out of the gardens. Those comes out of the gardens of everybody around here. And there is an appreciation for that kind of devotion that people shared and were willing to give. And they were honored to be able to bring flowers from their garden. How does the song go? Flowers of the rarest, of the fairest. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Now we're starting to get into a little bit further on down the road. This is the Episcopal throne, but what's unique about this, and where is that? That's right here. Notice the organ. We've got a little bit more sophisticated by then, and it's only September of 1924, but we've become more sophisticated. But what I'm going to draw your attention to is that archway at the top. These archways, these 4 archways, support the entire upper church chancel area. And there is no metal in there. Guastavino, in order to achieve this, they do several layers of very thin stones, and they create a monolith. And in order to achieve the ability to be so weight-bearing, they have, I think it's something like 1 million pounds that it's supporting. In order to do that, they had to increase the number of layers that they built. And these bricks that you see, they're no larger than maybe a couple inches thick. So they're very thin, but this herringbone pattern is their style. It's the Guastavino style. You're not going to find that anywhere else in the world. And you will not find this marriage of Pueblo pottery with ornamenting the Guastavino ceiling. You are not going to find that anywhere in the world. It is only here. Wow is right. So this is what the place looked like on the 25th of March, 1925. That's the north apse, and you'll notice right behind there, Our Lady of Washington. So the altar was moved out, and you'll see the bump again. Do you see the bump down there in the front, that little bump. Okay. So the walls and the spaces and the ceilings were supposed to support noble historical frescoes, and that is what happens. Shayan was a disciple of Giovanni Battista de Rossi, not our Rossi, but de Rossi, you know. So he is considered the father of Christian archaeology. It is through his efforts that the catacombs in Rome have been what they are today, because he was digging around in them when they were not the most attractive place to be. And it was through his efforts that they have been developed and further studied. This is what you're going to see in a catacomb. This is the catacomb of Priscilla, and much of our stuff comes from the catacomb of Priscilla. Shayan's first lecture was on the Blessed Virgin in the catacombs. He published it, and this church, the Crypt Church, this altar was dedicated to Our Lady of the Catacombs. Years later, we have nicknamed it the Mary Altar, but it is actually Our Lady, the altar of Our Lady of the Catacombs. So here's Mary Chase Stratton, the woman on the left. That's Murphy, McGinnis, and McKenna. Mary Stratton gets the task, she's from Detroit, she gets the task of ornamenting all of this space with poetic pottery, her unique brand of pottery. You gotta love this. She's doing her work in the garden with her hat, you know. It's the flavor of the times, you gotta love it. These are the tiles that you see in the ceiling, and I show this to you so that you understand every one of those tiles Mary did by hand. Every one of those. There is no machine, there is no a factory. Every tile has been touched by Mary. She has etched each tile itself, and each tile carries a symbol that she culled from the catacombs in Rome. Shayan arranged for her to have a summer in Rome, and she spent her days in the catacombs, and this is what she came back with. Shayan was ecstatic, okay? In an early publication, the Crypt Church is referred to as the catacomb under the sanctuary of the main church. We don't say that anymore, but it is catacomb-like. The crucifixion, it is much a part of our spirituality now, but in the early church, you are hard put to see anything about the crucifixion in the catacombs. If you can find one, I would be surprised. What you find is the saving power of God. You see victory, and that what surrounds you here in the Crypt Church is the saving power of God and victory. And where does it begin? Right here. If you're in the West Apse, I call it the Advent Apse because it presages the coming of Jesus. And on this inside wall is this. So afterwards you can go look. It is the hand of God. It is the hand of God coming down. And that is the beginning of everything. Everything begins with the intervention of God. The prophets are in that apse. You have Noah, you have Jonas, you have Malachi, Maccabeus, all of them who have a salvation story. And notice that each one of them is framed by those little tiles that Mary Stratton did. And those are also Mary Stratton's work. It took her 7 years to do this. It was the largest commission of her life. As we move, then you see this. Again, no crucifixion, but you have the cross. The cross as a sign of hope, the anchor, and attached to the cross, the fish, because the ichthys, or the word for fish, was kind of like a secret code for Jesus, for Christ. Tertullian refers to us as little fishes, after the image of our ichthys, Jesus Christ, that we are born in the water of baptism. And so then, Ichthus. They've taken that and they've used it to say Jesus Christ, God's Son, is Savior. Of these 5 Greek words, this is from Augustine. Notice how I've highlighted the beginning of each word in blue to spell out ichthus, form the word ichthus, the mystical name of Jesus the Christ, who in the abyss of our mortality, the depths of the sea, frees us from sin. So you have all of this symbolism going on. And for the early church people, they understood that symbolism. It made perfect sense to them. Remember, the apostles were fishermen. They all hung out with their nets and their boats and their water. They were fishermen. They understood it. It was organic to them. Early days, now how true this is, I'm not sure, but I love it. And they're in an early Hollywood film. They show the Christians, it was, you recall, that it was against the law to be Christian. It was punishable by death. So you didn't want to let people know you were Christian, but you kind of wanted to know. And so somebody, if they were near you and they saw you, like in this Hollywood film, it's a very ancient film, but it has stuck with me, somebody spills water on the table. And they did it intentionally so they could draw that line with the water. And then if you were a Christian and you wanted to let them know you were a Christian, you put the top on it. And so the fish becomes the symbol, the ichthus, Jesus Christ the Savior. It's subversive. It's quiet. Nobody knows, but everybody gets it. Then we move on into the North Apse, the Agnus Dei, one of the most important symbols. The Agnus Dei, the Lamb of God, with the nimbus, the victory cross. Notice how we're moving. We go from Advent, we go into incarnation, redemption, but you're still not seeing anything about crucifixion. It's victory. It's God's saving power. We come over here, panis et paesis, bread and fish. Remember, we just talked about fish and bread, that equation of Jesus and the fish. Bread of life, Jesus, the ichthus. That's over here on the inside. Over here in the East Apse, this is more or less Pentecost because it's the church as it's in motion. We've done the beginning, we've done the time of Christ. Now we're moving into another realm. And this is what the clay model looked like before Mary put it into the kiln and before she applied her, and this is what it looks like today, and that's where it is up there. That's a Virgin Mary. This particular apse, you will also see Peter and Paul, but look at, you have Christ and the martyrs. That's a new dimension. That comes later in the catacombs. The early catacombs, it's all about the prophetic saving power. And now we're looking at martyrs, so that's bringing us forward a little bit more. Not only martyrs, but the saints. Again, it's moving us into a realm that had not been quite understood. So we're 2 or 3 centuries further into the church. Notice the little prayers on the capstones or in the friezes. This is what's directly above us. In the center, you have God the Father, which you see very easily, and you always see the Spirit, but God the Son, this one above us, you don't see very often. It kind of gets lost in the shuffle. And this is what it looks like. And this is what you've got, Kadosh, the Hebrew. Kadosh again, and Kadosh again. In Hebrew, they don't say the holiest, they multiply it. Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Holy, holy, holy is the superlative. You are in the most holy of sections. It's the perfection of 3. Pythagoras has his theory. The thing about 3, he gets caught up in 3 because it is the only number that can be equated with the 2 numbers below it. And the whole thing about plus, 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 but times, times, times always gives you the same amount. And he says this harmony does not exist with any other number. In music, you're probably going to be surprised, threes was considered perfect time. There's common time, but 3 was perfect time. Now, if you look straight ahead in the corners, you see the trumpeting angels. They are at the front of each dome. Each dome or each apse is supposed to be the heavens, and these are the angels trumpeting the mysteries that are contained in that space. Here's the layout. This is on this side over here, at the top of each frieze, is the Salve Regina. It's carved in. In the north apse, it's the Ave Maria. The east apse, it's the Memorare. The litany is on the outer columns, but this is my favorite. The space you occupy is the Magnificat. All of those columns, the friezes at the top of all of those columns contains the Magnificat. And that is Mary's great thanksgiving. You are in the Magnificat zone. You have crossed the Magnificat threshold. You are in the middle of the great thanksgiving. The great thanksgiving. Shayan knew exactly what he was doing. And he was putting it out there. There's an old theologians will say, if you set the symbol, it will speak. You don't need to beat anybody over the head with it. That's what Shayan did. He set the symbols. They're here for you to revel in, to discover on your own, to touch, to feel, to feel. His whole thing about the emotional sacramental light, it's all here for you to learn for yourself. It is the first 3 centuries of Christianity. That is exactly what he intended it to be, and that is exactly what happens here. But to be in the center, this Magnificat zone, this my soul rejoices in God, my Savior, and in Judaism or in Hebrew poetry, we always say everything twice. So then the next line, and to be right here, right here. Do you get it? You see what I'm saying? So here we are. Notice how very, almost primitive those columns look. It's also a way for you to pilgrimage from chapel to chapel and have a prayer there for you. That begins over here and works its way around. The Magnificat threshold. This was Easter 1927. Notice there are no statues. They come at the end of the year. Notice the predella doesn't have any of the ornamentation. That comes with the statues. Notice the candlestick, and by the way, that is the same one. That base for the candle is the same one. That table, we still use it in the Blessed Sacrament Chapel upstairs. All of this. And notice the candlesticks and everything, they should be somewhat familiar. The other thing is, yes, exactly, the lights, and that they are, the columns are identified not at the base, but at the top. The Stations of the Cross have not gone in yet. The floor is rather new. You can see there are no pews. I mean, you can see where this, we just don't do any pews. We're going to be true Basilica fashion. And just, it was, but even just looking at the, at all of the lilies, to be quite honest, to the aesthetic eye, they look kind of spindly, you know? Especially when you compare it to our display, our beautiful, beautiful flowers that we have. But for the time and for the space. And where did you get lilies at that time? Like I said, there weren't a whole lot of florists around. This was a huge expense. This was a huge offering. So here we are, 100 years later, still living in God's grace, still participating in the Magnificat, and still celebrating worship here every day. How many times a day? So it is truly a day that the Lord has made. And if you are interested, that's me. This is a collection of articles that I have done for Mary Shrine that talk about in detail all of this material, and it's available online at nationalshrine.org, and they will direct you to the location. But if you want further reading, I go through the different apses and different events and give you a lot more detail. Okay? If you would like to come up and touch the stone, feel free to do so. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.